Recording in progress.
Howdy, everybody. There are a lot of people joining. Yes, so for those of you who don't know, the meeting will be recorded and will be pushed to YouTube tomorrow and to the Slack community as well. Hi, Luis, how are you doing? Welcome, everybody. Let's give it a few more minutes. We have a list of people joining as well. And you know the drill, drop on the chat where you're from and drop on the chat if you're an agency or a SaaS business or a freelancer. We'd love to know. Come on, guys. Florida, lovely. Agency, Norway, beautiful. Mark. Agency, Ireland. Agency, Washington. Oh, beautiful. Northwest England. Chicago, baby. There's one other Bangalore person. Hi. Swapnil is from Bangalore as well. New York City, Singapore. Come on, keep it coming. We'd love to know. Just 2 more minutes. We'll have the rest of the team joining, and then we can kickstart. Bulgaria, agency. Alex from Poland. Toronto, Canada, Satish. Hi, Sean, how's it going? So let's wait for 1 more minute. We're waiting for the rest of the crowd to join, but it's going to be only a minute more and then we kickstart. I'm on a different place, Lyle, so I don't have it right now. But not the same without Chester Swapnil.
Cool, Akash. I guess we can kick off. Let's get the people what they've been waiting for. The secret sauce to, Jesse's 90% reply rates. Let's go.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for all of you all for taking the time today. We are as pumped as you. And today we have none other than the man here, Jesse Hernandez. So as you know, Jesse is the CEO of Learn Email and the founder of Mail Genius. Most of y'all might keep seeing Jesse posting what he's achieving through reply rates. And sometimes I'm just wowed, And Jesse consistently drives 90% plus reply rates through, strategic data usage. He has powerful outbound frameworks and he has a robust email infrastructure. So I'll leave it to Jesse. I don't want to talk too much about him. Jesse, if I'll hand over the mic to you. So just a quick round of introduction. We'd love to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. Been in the email game for over 7 years now. I founded Mail Genius 5 years ago to build a free email deliverability tester. And, it's been really awesome to be part of the, work with the Smartlead team. Smartlead has been like the best software I've used. I've been in the game for a long time. I've tried everything out there, and it's awesome to work with such a cool team and such a great product.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jesse. And the reason why this session is really important is because I talk to people, all of us are wondering how to achieve 90% plus reply rates. And for all of you who've joined, just listen to what Jesse says, and we should be able to achieve that. So without further ado, the thing we're looking to look for is the importance of high quality data. I think that's where cold emailing starts, right? So you get the data, you bring it in, you do the verification, etc. You build your infrastructure. But the first step is going to be getting your data. So we'd love to hear from you the importance of high quality data, Jesse, and your thoughts on around data.
Sure. When it comes to data, I think, I've worked with a bunch of different clients. So I'm sure all of you here have different types of clients, whether you have an agency, whether you have a SaaS, whether it's B2B or whether it's B2C. I think first and foremost, we should just start with what high quality data is. In my opinion, when it comes to high quality data, I've had the luxury of working with a bunch of different types of companies. When it comes to the B2B side, I've been able to partner with companies that have different types of sources of data. They have affiliate data, but that affiliate data is high quality. The emails are coming in, the people have opted in, but they may not directly know who the person is. I've also been able to work on the B2C side where the client was able to build a proprietary system of where they had data and that data had high intent. I think it's not just about the quality of the email, but it's the intent behind how the email is sourced. So, definitely when it comes to enriching or finding different types of data, there's a lot of tools out there. I mean, every single year, every single month, it feels like there's a new database, a new tool coming out. I think the only way for success when it comes to data, and again, I'm mainly talking from an agency perspective, you have to, before I work with anyone, I want to vet where's their data coming from. And have they had any success with email in the past? If they've never had any success with email, may or may not be a good fit, but definitely depending on where their data is going to really define everything. If you don't have high quality data, if you have data that's just coming from one standard source, it's typically not enough to perform well. I mean, typically you want to have, 3 to 5 or multiple sources of data, and you need to be able to test that data, and that type of data, you need to take a deeper look at it, because what type of data is it? If it's B2C, is it majority Gmail? If it's B2B, do they have filters? You need to look at not just where the data is coming from, but what type of mailboxes, is the data composed of? And obviously, if the data has some form of intent behind it, when I had the 90% positive reply rates, I would say the main source of success there is having it's not just about the offer, it's knowing that the data that you have has the intent of what you're offering. So it's intent. You can have a great offer, but you must know that the data has the intent behind it. And then the goal of the campaigns, the reason they've had such a, high positive response rate is it's never asking for time. I'm always qualifying, because yes, I know the data has the intent, but instead of assuming, I'm always going to ask. I always want to get a yes before I go. The funnel always starts with getting a reply. That's top of the funnel is always the response. And then how do you convert the positive response into an actual, subscriber or lead or, conversion?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you so much for this, Jesse. And I would love to understand how you would define saturated data, or how you would define high quality data. So is it just the intent, or other
Yeah, I mean,
aspects that
like
we
I
should look
said,
for?
so I'm coming from an agency perspective. Typically, when a client wants to work with me, they have some source of data. Usually, the most successful sources of data that I've seen personally has been something proprietary. If you're just using Apollo, if you're just using certain sources, it may or may not be okay. When you're starting to use sources like Apollo and, the most common, types of data sources out there, it may or may not work, but that data is typically hit. They might be getting hit 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 times a day, let alone over a week, and definitely depending on who you're going after. I mean, on the B2B side, if you're going after, CTOs versus CEOs, depending on the decision maker, it can be extremely hard to get a response. So you need to have a very specific way of how do you get a response. And I would say, if you're coming from an agency perspective, you want to look at, if you're working with a SaaS company, before you even dive into anything, you want to understand what are their current clients look like? Who do they have the most success with? And then you want to build a demographic based off that. And then you want to understand once you understand the ideal demographic, you need to understand how does email work for them, because a CTO is completely different than a CEO, and a CEO is completely different than a CMO. And plus, because you know whether your data is saturated or not, you have to be able to test. I mean, testing everything. Some things may work, some things may not. You have to have, you know, the best thing about Smartlead is it allows you to test things. And sometimes I might think something's going to work, sometimes it doesn't work. The ability to have a robust infrastructure, have different data sources, and be able to have dynamic sequences, spintax, all of that is kind of the key for success. I would say, like, data is the input, so your input is your output. It's the most important thing when it comes into having a good sequence. If you don't have great data, or there's no intent behind your data, it doesn't matter how good your copy is. It doesn't matter how good your infrastructure is. You have to figure out, and I think the answer is, like, if you can, try to build something proprietary, try to have multiple sources, and try to build something that's specific to you, whether it's like a custom LinkedIn sales nav, whether it's Clay, and then you can also have the other sources, but you need to understand what's converting well too. If you just start pushing in a bunch of data and you're not getting a lot of success, that's very, very bad from an infrastructure perspective. If you're just starting with Apollo and you're getting a 1% reply rate and you continue to scale up your volume, but your replies aren't going up and you're not getting positive replies, you need to know, you need to have some metrics in place to say, look, this isn't working. I need to test. I need to stop. And because if you keep sending a lot of emails, you're not getting enough replies, it'll actually burn your entire infrastructure. And then you can have a great source of data, but it doesn't convert. And then you're not able to figure out what's going on. So I think starting off in small batches, having, you know, dynamic sequences based on data and based on infrastructure will allow you to see what's working and what's not.
Absolutely. That's so clear. And that makes a lot of sense, because as happened to me as well, sometimes the data might be fine, but your mailbox is already burnt, and that might not actually get you the results, but experimenting works. Thank you so much for this. And lastly, since we came to this topic, which drives me to the next question, do you have any suggestions in terms of tools that we can look for enriching high quality data?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most successful ones, like I said, been in the game for about 7 years. I built a lot of different outbound systems. I would say, at least for the most successful clients I've had, they've already figured out the data. Most of the time, they've already figured out the data, and it's all over the place. Usually, they have their own proprietary source, whether it's affiliate data, whether they have a partner that they've been working with. They have a lot of data. Like, typically, when I work with someone, they may already have 100,000 to 300,000 contacts, and some of these contacts too, you know, yes, it's cold email, right? But sometimes you might be able to find data that's been opted into somewhat lukewarm. The goal is just to take that data. You know, the email is good. You know, there's some intent, and the goal is just to get a response started. I haven't tracked, open tracking. I haven't looked at that in maybe 4 years now. To me, the only metric for success here is, am I getting a response? Is the email bouncing? Is it getting delivered? And am I getting a positive response? And obviously paying attention to where that data came from and what type of response you're getting is probably the most important thing. You have to, everything when it comes to outbound systems is being reactive, because again, like, even with my years of experience, sometimes an infrastructure that I have doesn't work as well as something else, or sometimes the data that I thought would work doesn't work. And I think being very careful of your volume and being never push things too fast until you start seeing some success. I mean, that's like the biggest thing I would say, is that I see when I'm consulting for clients, I see that they have very low reply rates and extremely high volume. So they're basically burning their infrastructure and tarnishing their data without having any success. But if they would have done smaller batches, smaller tests, and figured out what's going on, is it the data? Is it the copy? Is it the infrastructure? You have to tackle this earlier on, because if you scale too quick and too fast and you're not getting responses, your emails are going to go to spam.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. You're wasting your mailbox, you're burning your domains, and you're wasting your data as well. That makes a lot of sense, Jesse. And lastly, finishing this topic, would you be open to share your process of procuring data?
Yeah, like I said before, I'm coming from an agency perspective. So I would say I've done B2B, I've done B2C. I have a B2B client. They have their own proprietary system where they have basically partner companies. These partner companies have opt-in data. The data is not completely warm, but I would say it's much warmer than sourcing it from another source. It's coming in from different opt-in affiliate partners. And then I would say the other one was B2C. They built their own proprietary system to get opt-ins. And then again, I think Smartlead is the best. Regardless of where you're getting your emails, the best thing is to use a sequencer. Sequencers perform much better than an ESP. That you keep it text-based, you have no tracking, and it performs. I mean, Smartlead works really well for any type of contacts, whether it's opt-in or non-opt-in. Sequences typically outperform broadcasts and campaigns almost every time.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. And now we have the data, right? So let's move on to the next segment, where you're designing your outbound systems based on the data that you've received. So could you throw some light on that, Jesse? How do you build outbound frameworks tailored to the type of data that you receive?
Yeah. So when it comes to building an outbound system, obviously you start with the data. When you have your data, you're going to run it through a validator. I use Emailable. I think there's a ton out there, Never Bounce, Zero Bounce. There's a million different tools. Yeah, there's a lot of tools. But I think the most important thing I'm looking at is what are the MX records? I need to understand what are the MX records of the recipients that I'm emailing. So I start with that. So if I have 100,000 contacts, I clean them up, I look at the MX records, and then I'll insert a pie chart and I'll look at the breakdown by mailbox provider. And that's going to tell me how I'm going to design my outbound system. So if I see that 60% of the data is Gmail or G Suite, 20% of the data is Office, and then the other 20% might be a combination of, iCloud, Proofpoint, filters, firewalls, then I have enough of an indicator. I kind of base that ratio, whatever the ratio of the data is, and I try to look at a larger data set to get a better idea.
Right.
The more data you have, the better you can design it. And then I follow a similar ratio. So if it's like 60%, 20% Office and then something else is the rest, I usually use a mixture of things. I always start kind of with again, maybe it depends on where you're at, but 5 to 10 domains gives me enough to be able to test things. And if I have 10 domains to start, I'll have maybe 4 or 5 of them are G Suite, maybe 3 to 5 mailboxes for the G Suite. Then I typically test Office. I use a little bit more mailboxes on Office. I have a few domains on Office, but I use 10 to 15 mailboxes for Office. And then I'm testing different SMTPs. I've had a lot of success with SendGrid on a dedicated IP.
Right.
But again, like when you start getting into SMTP, it may or may not work. It really depends on, you need to have enough volume to build a reputation, and you need to be able to monitor your volume with Google Postmaster. There's a lot that goes into it, but it can work really, really effectively. When you have Office, you have G Suite, and you have an SMTP that actually works, it allows you to scale. And it also allows you, again, the goal is always to send the least amount of emails and get the most amount of replies. And then once you actually double down, when I'm building the sequences, my sequences, I always separate them by the provider. I know that Smartlead is able to, send emails dynamically based on the provider, but I separate my sequences by G Suite, by SendGrid, and by Office at the beginning, because I actually want to understand what's the reply rate by provider, because I need to baseline what's my Office response rate, what's my G Suite response rate, and what's my SMTP response rate. And then that gives me a lot of insight into understanding what should I double down on. So if I start with 10 domains and I see that G Suite is double, Office or double SendGrid, then I'm going to double down on bringing more G Suite mailboxes online. But again, I've tested a lot. I have a lot of different outbound systems that I built. Sometimes an SMTP will outperform G Suite. Sometimes Office 365 will outperform G Suite. So it really depends on the data and the breakdown by mailbox provider.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, Jesse. And how do different data segments impact copywriting and outreach strategies? Could you throw some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me specifically, I've been doing this for 7 years. And when I first started, I had maybe 1% reply rates, 2% reply rates. And my emails were essays. They were way too long. I wasn't getting any responses. And then I kind of took on ownership and figured out what am I doing wrong? And to figure it out, I mean, I have a framework that's worked for me. I think regardless of whether it's B2B, regardless of whether it's B2C, I've been able to scale a lot, even the sequences and the results that you guys see in the share wins channels. I don't use personalized sentences. I'm not saying you can't, but actually, if it's not done right, it just ends up sounding very generic. If everyone is using, everyone's hitting Apollo, everyone's hitting the same personalized sentence, and it's a generic sentence about something on LinkedIn, about something, a post, it doesn't actually add any value. So for me, my emails are very short. They're very concise. I use vulnerability. I keep them short. And again, for deliverability, I'm very specific about my signatures. I'm very specific about my follow-up emails. Everything I'm doing is 1, based on replies, and 2, based on deliverability. Whether it's B2B or B2C, kind of the formula that I'll go over later on, it works pretty well either way.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. So now let's move on to the next segment, right? So where we have the data right now and we have the setup right now. So the next thing is going to be building a robust email infrastructure. And that's what is going on the chats as well. People would love to know what you're using, what SMTP you would recommend. So what is the importance of the infrastructure, Jesse, on a whole, right? So how important this is, such as SMTPs, warm-ups, deliverability monitoring. So I'd love to know how important the infrastructure is and how important these aspects are, where be it warm-ups, be it deliverability monitoring, etc. So would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that
sorry,
goes.
Jesse.
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you in between. I think people are asking for how would you define vulnerability? That's something that people are, pushing through.
How would I define what?
Vulnerability.
To deliverability.
Yeah.
How would I define deliverability? So deliverability would be defined, basically so when you look at something and you see delivery rate,
No,
that's
sorry,
completely different
Not
than deliverability.
No, I
deliverability.
think vulnerability. Bryce, I see that. So how do you define vulnerability? So
Vulnerability,
yeah,
where is it?
it's on the chat.
What are
So
you referring to?
exactly, that's what I'm
Oh,
wondering.
vulnerability for copy,
Yeah.
for copy.
Yeah.
Vulnerability would be, I'm not sure, I don't know, because when I see a lot of emails, they're always making assumptions. You should never make an assumption in your email. The goal of the email is always to qualify, to get a response, and to get a yes or a no. It doesn't matter. The goal is to get a response. And I think the only way you can get a response is being vulnerable and being personable. And again, I've been able to scale all of the sequences I have without personalized sentences. And again, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it. I'm not saying that they cannot increase the reply rate, but I'm saying before you start investing in personalized sentences, if you can't get a decent reply rate above a 5% without personalization, it's probably not going to help you. It may or may not help you. So I like to say, I'm not sure, I wasn't sure, I don't know. And then I used copy like, I'm not sure if you're responsible for, I wasn't sure if you're still working at. It's just generic copy that's meant to be, it's even if I know that they're working at a company, even if I know that they're a specific role, I'm not going to say, hey, I saw you're a CEO. It doesn't add anything. I'm going to say, hey, are you still at this role? And then I transition into, different value props and a simple, usually low friction CTA, yes or no.
I hope that answered all your questions, Bryce, for you as well. But yeah, I'm looking at the chats right now. So sorry about that. Now I know what you guys are asking. But yeah, coming back to the infrastructure and the SMTP setup and the importance of warm-ups and deliverability monitoring, Jesse, you can go ahead with that.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. I think obviously, like I was saying, your infrastructure is one component, right? So it's being able to, you have G Suite, you have Office, you have SendGrid. That's one component, but you need to have tools that are on top of that. So on top of that, you might have Google Postmaster for your SMTP. You need to have enough volume, typically 500 plus emails a day. If you don't, and again, that volume can come from warming volume. It can come from different sources, but you definitely need to have enough volume to have Google Postmaster. Google Postmaster is really important. If your data is above 50% G Suite and you don't have enough volume to display in your Google Postmaster, you have no insight on your domain reputation. You have no insight on your IP reputation, and you have no insight on your spam rate. So you're kind of working in the blind. And then outside of that, I would say like Smartlead has some indicators on the warm-up side and the deliverability side. It's giving me a baseline of how things look. But as the founder of Mail Genius, one thing I do, I guess one advantage I have that others don't have is one of the features we developed is called automatic email testing. So I have basically one email address on Mail Genius. I put it into my sequences as if I'm a subscriber, and every single email I send, every initial email, follow-up email, it runs a Mail Genius test. And that's important because what could happen is maybe something in your content got flagged. Maybe your IP got blacklisted. Things can change. Something in your signature can be blacklisted. Something can be flagged as spammy. The point is, and even one of the things we're working on too is SCL and BCL. So if you're emailing someone who has an office address, they look at your spam complaint level and your bulk complaint level, and actually it'll identify if your message is classified as spam. And this is really important because if you keep emailing, if more of your data is 20% or more Office, and you're emailing Office data and Office is classifying your message as spam, and you continue to send the email, you're training Office that one, your emails belong in spam, and they'll further classify it as, eventually get into a blacklist just because you keep emailing. So you need to have probably, I would say Mail Genius automatic email testing is good. I'd be very careful with which warming tools you use too. I've used different tools out there, and I've noticed that there's a correlation with which tools you use. You can actually send messages to spam. There's a lot that's like Gmail's catching up to a lot. I've been in the warming space for probably 4 or 5 years now. I'd be very careful about which tools you use to warm. I haven't had any issues with Smartlead, but there's other tools out there. Just be very careful. And I think before you invest fully in any warming solution, you test it on a small set and you compare the results. If you notice that one warming provider is getting you higher replies, then you slowly scale up. Don't go all in on one provider, and don't go all in on one SMTP provider either. You need to test in small batches and then potentially scale up. And you need to have at least decent copy. Like typically before I scale anything or test anything, I need to have at least a 3 to 5% reply rate, and I'm taking smaller sets. When I notice I hit my 5% reply rate, then that's when I'm ramping up and scaling things up. I don't go all in immediately, especially with the volume. Lower volume first.
Fair enough. And you did mention there's one question in the chat, JC. So you mentioned multiple server across 3 carriers. Which one have you seen perform best?
Yeah, good question. So it's different for each one because again, the data is different. I have a B2C client which specialized, I would say 80% of the data was G Suite. Obviously, G Suite worked best because Gmail to Gmail. However, I've noticed, been doing this for a while. I feel like this is just from my experience. I've noticed that a slight decline in G Suite, not that it's not performing well, but it's not performing as good as it used to. So I think it's even more important to have different providers. I think like in my experience, I would say G Suite's performed the best. SendGrid, for me, dedicated IP has performed the second best, and Office performs third across the board. However, sometimes, again, dedicated IP and SMTP, depending on your data, can outperform G Suite. It has in the past. And again, the good thing about an SMTP, if you warm it up properly and you have good enough data, you can actually have it's much more affordable. You can scale it up, and that dedicated IP and the SMTP can be used.
And how many emails constitute a small batch testing, Jesse?
Yeah, for me, it's probably like 500 to 1,000, somewhere around there.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Anything else on the chat? Nothing else. So let's go back to our. Give me a quick moment right here. Yeah. So you've given us all, and the next thing is crafting copies that get replies. We did see a glimpse of this, but we'd love to get deeper inside this. So do you have any proven approach of copywriting using spintaxes, message variants for personalized outreach, Jesse?
Yeah, so for me, I would say you have to use Smartlead's features. If you're just going in and not using all the different features, all the different variables, you're not going to get the best results. When you see the emails that had a 90% positive reply rate, I had 30 to 40 rotating subject lines. So I use a ton of spintax there. Typically my emails, I would say max would be 5 sentences, 3 to 5 sentences, never longer. And then I test a lot of things. Sometimes I put a CTA right in the first part of the email, because when you send an email on Gmail, you can see the pre-header text. The pre-header text is your first opportunity before the person opens the email to get a reply. So I usually ask a question immediately, either in my first email or my follow-up email. I typically never ask more than 2 questions in an email. I think 1 question typically performs best. Sometimes if you have more than 1 question, it's hard for the person to know how to respond. And then, like I said before, I'm either going with vulnerability or I'm going to go with something educational and very direct. I'm going to be speaking about something that's important, something that's going to affect your business. It's going to be very direct, very clear. For example, I have a B2B client. I'm telling them a date about something. I'm telling them something that's coming up. And then I'm asking, instead of just forcing things upon them, I'm asking, have they heard about it before? I come from an educational angle. Educational angle tends to work well. But it just depends. It's a lot of testing. For the B2C side, again, same thing, 4 sentences or less. But I ask a very open-ended questions. Usually, if I know the data has high intent, for example, someone's looking for a job, I'm going to ask them, are you looking for a job? I'm going to ask the same question that's aligned with their intent. And then from there, really the funnel, you have to master how you respond to people, how quickly you respond to people, what you ask them to do. I think if you're going to get a positive response, how quickly you respond to them and the concierge behind it. People don't want to take extra steps. If you send them to a landing page, they might not opt in. If you can opt in for them, if you can take the next step for them, they're way more likely to convert, or at least they're going to sign up for a webinar. They're going to, if you wait for them to do something, you're going to get a big drop off there. So you definitely, just because you have a positive reply, you need to make sure that you put them into a follow-up sequence, and you need to make sure that you respond pretty quick. I mean, I had 2 VAs monitoring all the replies pretty much full time and making sure that they respond within, 5-10 minutes or quicker if possible.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. And this brings us to the next question, right? So what is the psychology CTAs that compel prospects to reply, Jesse?
Yeah, all of my CTAs are typically low friction CTAs. Depending on where the data is from, I'm going to educate someone and then ask them a question because they may not know about something. So have you heard of this? Did you know about this? Did you already file? Open-ended question. They may not know who we are, but now they know something that they didn't know. And I'm just asking before I even tell them about everything. Hey, have you heard about this? No, I haven't. Can you tell me more? Things like that. On the B2C side where I had the client, again, I had high intent data. I knew they were looking for a job. I'm asking, I'm not sure if you're still in the market, but I wanted to check in and then we can help you X, Y, and Z. Are you still looking for a job? It's like very open-ended questions. And something like that worked so well because obviously 1, I knew the data was I knew they were looking for a job. I knew they needed a job. But 2, the question was always, I want to get a yes. I always want to get a yes. I want to get a response from them. I want it to be positive and I want it to be irresistible. Sometimes I'll also I have a lot of different split testing. So I don't just use a lot of spintax in the subject line. I also have maybe 4 to 6 different variants. And I'm testing different things. I'm testing lead magnet. I'm testing the type of CTAs. I'm testing the type of copy. I'm testing the length, because sometimes what I think will convert, it doesn't convert as well. Sometimes longer copy could work, but for me, it's been 3 to 5 sentences max. And it's always been an open-ended question. And then for my follow-up email, it's 1 question. I never ask more than 1 question. Obviously, sometimes it could add, but what I noticed is the more you talk about yourself, the less replies you get.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And thank you so much for this. And we have something in the chat. This is something common that most of the people who start with cold email might think about. So why replies over link clicks and open race? I understand, that's what we're trying to aim, and that's the whole idea of running a cold email campaigns. But why plain text? What is your thoughts behind plain text versus raw emails?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be super eccentric with this stuff. A lot's changed and a lot continues to change. I haven't used open tracking. You want to have everything in your favor to get the email delivered. I mean, if the email doesn't get delivered and it doesn't reach that person, it doesn't matter how good your copy is, how good your offer is, or how good your data is. So I'd say the things that you could do to increase that is, obviously, for me, it's been shorter copy. For me, I may or may not have a link in the signature. I have spintax to, sometimes I have a link, sometimes I don't. Typically, no link is okay. Yes, you can still generate traffic. Maybe if you have a link, it can generate traffic. I mean, I've seen people who will buy something, they've never responded to an email, but they end up converting. But I don't have that on all my emails. I usually have no links, but I may have an email with a link. It'll rotate in the spintax. And then, yeah, I mean, no link tracking, no open tracking, and everything I do is specifically for deliverability first. So I pay attention to my signatures. I pay attention to my unsub disclaimers. I have spintax and everything, spintax in the unsub disclaimer. And then the signature could be very sensitive too. You can get a link flagged, you can get a title flagged, you can get a phone number flagged. So less is more when it comes to your signature. And then also in the copy, I'm always using as much Smartlead variables as I can. My salutations, have a wonderful Wednesday. Good morning, Jesse. It's always, as much as I can, I have it at the beginning, I have it at the end. And then again, typically short, punchy copy with some vulnerability. I wasn't sure if you're still working here, but I wanted to check in. And then you transition into how you can help them. Very punchy. It's specifically about them. It's not about you. You specifically gear your copy towards them, and then you have to qualify. You don't really have to talk about yourself that much. You just make something irresistible, and then you just ask a question, open to learning more. It's very, very, very short, typically 3 or 4 sentences.
Thank you so much for that, Jesse. This is really insightful, and this is all I had from my end. But we have a couple of other questions coming on the chat, but this was pretty insightful for me personally. But I'll let the floor open for questions. So anybody who has a question, please raise your hand and turn on your video. We'll turn the spotlight on and you can go for your questions.
I see one. Suggestions for lead magnets. Maybe I could just answer that real quick.
Yeah,
for lead magnets, you can test different types of lead magnets. You might have a free tool. You might have an asset, an ebook, a PDF. Again, I think, like, even if you don't have an asset, make an asset. You need to understand. And again, like, you want to understand when you're looking at who your ICP is, your ideal client profile, you want to understand, what do they actually need? What are they struggling with? And you need to make something irresistible. I personally think tools, I mean, obviously I founded MailGenius. MailGenius was completely free, and it still is free. You can run several tests. There's no friction for the person. If they're having an issue, there's no friction for them to try it. They're probably open to it, especially if they're having a problem. And again, the goal is to always qualify. Are you having an issue? And then you can offer the free tool, or you can offer the free tool right at the beginning. I think lead magnets may or may not work, but you need a split test, not just a lead magnet, but you also need to split test credibility, right? Like, which companies have used it? How many people have used it before? What are the results from it? You need to test either short copy, punchy, or you need to test credibility copy. Hey, I have this asset. I created it for you. Can I share it with you? And then you put a sentence underneath there, which adds credibility, and it needs to be either talk about competitors, either talk about results, either talk about revenue. You need to be very specific about what's the opportunity cost if they don't use the lead magnet or the asset.
So thank you for that. Frank has a question. My dear friend, let me spotlight you. Go for it, buddy.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep. All
Yes,
clear.
sweet. Okay, so you mentioned earlier in the call about the quality of data, right? Like, what is, and you use the term quality of data specifically. What I was kind of wondering was, is the quality of the data tied to intent signals? Like, for instance, you mentioned like sometimes a client comes to you already with a list that's been sourced in a particular way that leads the prospects or that would imply that the prospects on that list have a high degree of intent or a large gap that the offer would actually solve. So in your case, again, and again, this is just kind of me trying to piece together what you were saying. Are you saying it's essentially like identifying the intent signal and then figuring out like, is this audience actually experiencing the problem that the offer solves, or is there another variable to this that like I'm missing?
Yeah, I have two different cases on the B2B side. So it was related to something related to business, related to forming a business. Basically, they had that data. It was affiliate data that they've partnered with. They may have another company and they may have another offer. In that case, they had 300 to 500,000 contacts. It was related to forming a business. Then I had a different offer related to, not related to forming a business, but related to after you form a business, what do you need to do? So again, it's not, there was no real intent, but it was more, I knew they formed a business. I knew they registered for something. So then now I'm offering them something related to compliance. For the B2C side, they had a proprietary way of getting people who needed a job. And that worked really well. If you have an intent, I knew that they needed a job. So obviously I had a product that can help them get placed. And obviously that's something that they need. You know, the need there and the intent there was so strong. I mean, especially with layoffs and things like that. That's why I had the 90% positive reply rate, because the data had high intent. People already qualified themselves. So I'm just, my emails reconfirming the qualification and then converting.
So you're saying it kind of goes to the strategy of like, it, is the audience primed for the service or offer? And that's what you're qualifying as like, or that's what you're saying is defines the quality of data. Like, how close are they to kind of wanting or needing the offer the company is actually trying to sell?
100%, because if you formed a business, that's just step one. Because you formed a business, now you need to stay compliant. So now I need to ask them, hey, did you know about this thing? Are you open to learning more? And it's pretty serious. It's pretty important. And again, how the copy converts. Sometimes the copy won't convert if you're too educational. They're going to be thrown off because it's like, dude, you're giving me too much information. I didn't know any of this. I just want it done for me. So you have to test. On the B2C side. I mean, that worked really well because again, I mean, specifically related to needing a job and asking them if they're looking for a job. It just worked really well. And obviously subject lines. I mean, subject lines, no more than 3 words ever for me. One form of personalization, either company name or first name, very short subject lines. I keep them very, very short. Variations would be like, hi from Jesse, company name, hyphen check-in, company name check-in. Very, very, very short. I mean, all of my subject lines have been 3 words or less. Maybe there's some exceptions in there in the spintax, but the highest converting subject lines for the last like 7 years of doing this have always been shorter with some form of personalization. First name, company name. You don't have to go crazy with it. The goal is to get the open, and to get the open, you need to get attention, and to get attention, you need to have something that gets attention. It's curiosity. It's something that's, wait, what is this? Is this someone I know? Hi from Jesse. Who's Jesse? Do I know him? Or company name check-in, or just company name. Less is more when it comes to subject lines for sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Frank. Cheers. So before we hop on to Satish, one question from the chat. Jesse, it's from Michael. So what's good booking ratio and what are top 3 things you do to maximize it? Positive reply rates, booked meeting ratio.
Yeah, I wouldn't know exactly booked meeting ratio. So the clients I have, they're not looking for meetings. They're looking for people to buy a product, typically SaaS related. But I would say like when I'm looking at numbers, obviously the first thing I'm looking at is what's my delivery rate. If my bounce rate's higher than 1%, that's flagging. It should be less than 0.5, like half of a percentile. Like it should not be, if anything is happening on the front of the data, I already know there's an issue there. So anything more than 1% of a bounce rate, you need to see what's going on. Why are the emails bouncing? What's causing that? Then as far as reply rate, if I'm just starting a campaign, I need at least 3 to 5%. None of my volume and none of my infrastructure is scaling up until I see at least a 3 to 5%. If I'm at a 4 to 5% reply rate, that's good. As far as positive reply rate, typically I would say like, I mean, I've had a lot of success. It's been, maybe it's an outlier. Some things just work better than others, but typically 40% or more. Right. And that comes back down to the offer and the quality of the data. So 40% should respond positively. And then I would say out of those, probably like somewhere between 10 to 20% will actually end up converting, just because they get on a, if you're going to talk about meetings, it'd be, 40% should respond positively out of the 5%. And then out of those 40%, I would say just be prepared that you're going to have at least half drop off. So 20%, again, they may or may not book a meeting, and then they may or may not show up to the meeting. So again, probably maybe 1/4 or less of that data of your positive replies will convert. But if you have good follow-up sequences, if you're using, I really like Smartlead's, the AI categorization, and I really like subsequences. If you have that dialed in and you have that tested, that's going to increase your booked meeting ratio for sure.
Got it. Thank you for that, Michael. I hope that answered your question. So next up, we have Satish Jesse. Satish, let me unmute yourself. Yeah, go for it, mate.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for all the insights. It's really amazing. What are you doing is really great. Thank you so much for that. My question is like, so far, what are you you have given? It's completely understandable for the B2B perspective to gain more leads. But in terms of like B2C, like let's say if I'm having a like large database, like 500,000 contacts, all are legal and compliant contacts. So how do we set the infrastructure for this much large contacts? Let's say I'm in the telecom industry. So, generally GC would and the Outlook providers, they always like filter the keywords like electronics, phones, all these keywords are automatically moved to the promotions tab, right? So how do we set the database? How do we set the infrastructure to reach to the inbox?
Yeah, I think, when I shared the wins for the 90% reply rate, that was all B2C, that was 70 to 80% Gmail. I would say typically when you're talking about scaling, you probably need a minimum of 10 domains. You need a minimum of 50 to 75 mailboxes. That's like starting off. I think if you're talking about being able to scale and reach the inbox, the primary, you probably want 20 domains. You probably want 100 to 200 mailboxes, which obviously, is a good amount. And then I would say specifically for Gmail, obviously no open tracking, no click tracking. Everything is text-based. You have good subject lines, some personalization, very short. And then specifically to Gmail, I would say it's typically I'm gonna stick G Suite to Gmail is going to be the #1 thing there. Again, you can use SendGrid, but even if you use any form of SMTP, it's more likely to be associated with marketing. So for my success, it was, I would say, like the best performing campaign. It almost pushed 13% reply rate with 90% positive reply rate at scale. And talking about scale, I've scaled, when you have up to, let's say I had 178 mailboxes, I had 18 domains, and I would say over 100 of them were G Suite. I was able to scale those up to, I don't really push, somewhere between 25 to 35 emails a day per mailbox. But again, I didn't get to that volume. It took a while. I don't scale anything up until 2 to 6 months. The more patient you are with it, the more scalable it can be. The goal is to figure out how to get the highest reply rate from the beginning. If you don't have less than a 3% reply rate, you haven't dialed in your copy. So maybe something's off with the data. And then you have to understand too, like most of the replies should come in the first email or the second email. If you're not getting responses in the first or second email, something's off. Like, yes, you're going to get responses in the follow-ups, and obviously you need to follow up a lot. The more follow-ups you have and the more touch points you have, the higher the response rate will be. So that your sequence should be 6 to 8 steps. And again, you need to split test different types of follow-ups. For me, what's worked well is just asking my follow-up email #1 is just a question, super short, super concise, just another qualifying question. And that typically email #1 and 2 have the highest responses, but you can split test different types of things. Maybe the lead magnet comes in later, maybe a webinar, webinars worked really well for me. So even for that B2C, even though it was B2C and even though it was Gmail, I had over 2,000 webinar opt-ins because I said, hey, I'm not sure if you're still looking for a job, but if you are, we're hosting an event to help engineers get more jobs. Open to learning more, or hey, the event is on this date. Would you like to register? And thousands of people would say, yes, of course, I want to sign up. I need to sign up because your issue or their intent or their issue is that they were unemployed. So they would do anything to figure out how to change that, reality. So definitely, I would say G Suite works best for Gmail and probably 10, 20 domains. And then as far as domains, you need 3 to 5 separate Google workspaces, 3 to 5 domains in each Google workspace. You don't want to cross them too much. I never have more than maybe 5 domains in each Google workspace. And then how you set up your mailboxes is important too. Obviously, you need to have, typically females get higher responses than males. So I do like a 60-40 ratio. Obviously, you have a nice profile photo, business casual, smiling, and you need to test because you need to make sure that your from name and your photo are displaying properly. Just because you have it set up does not mean it's going to render properly. So you could have a great infrastructure, but if you didn't test your emails and see how they're rendering, that could be the difference between another 1 to 3%. Every little thing, you know, with email, specifically with cold email and outbound, every extra thing you do is a difference between an extra 1% in response rate. Could be your data, could be your deliverability, could be your copy, could be your offer. Every little thing you can dial in and work on getting best in class. That's how I've been able to I think the biggest thing here is how do you optimize your copy? So if you have a 3% reply rate, how do you go from a 3% to a 7%? And I would say that's the difference between, you know, an expert and a non-expert, is figuring out how do you increase your response rate. So what do I do? There's like two things. I'm always looking at how do clients talk about the product or service? What are the words they use? And then most importantly, how are they responding to my copy? What words are they using? What are they saying? And that's really important, because if you're getting a bunch of responses that are saying something like, no, I don't need this, well, then that's your offer. If you're getting responses that are negative, or they're like, you know, pissed off, do not contact, well, then that's your copy. Something is dialed in where your copy doesn't feel valuable to them and it feels spammy. You have to, like, every single response. I mean, the only reason I was able to get over that almost a 13% response rate is I literally looked at, you know, the cool thing about Smartlead is you can go into your inbox and you can export all of the responses, and you can do some cool things behind that, because you can see what are the most common words. And when someone responds positive, why are they responding positive? Which email did they respond positively to? So you need to take a deep dive into your responses. You need to take a deep dive into which email people are responding to. And then you need to take a deeper dive and understand, why did they reply, and why did they reply that way to this email? And then if you could dial it in, if they responded to a later email, a later follow-up, if you could dial it in at the top part of your sequence, you noticed, hey, this email, this lead magnet converted and people are positive, bring it up to the top, because the goal is always you need to get as many responses in your first or second email, because if you don't, from an infrastructure perspective, from an engagement perspective, it's going to be very, very hard to scale.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Jesse. Next up is Julian. Let me quickly spotlight you. Yep, go for it, Julian. We can't hear you. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yep.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Jesse, so I heard you mention that you're using SendGrid. Are you using Smartlead to mail out of SendGrid?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're still only sending those 25 to 30 emails from SendGrid, or are you sending more?
It depends. I've scaled up to like 220 emails a day on SendGrid. But again, that only worked because I had a very high positive response rate. I'd say typically, like, I wouldn't push an SMTP above maybe 50 to 60 emails to be safe a day. But to get to that volume, you need at least 5 to 7% reply rate, and you need at least 30% plus of those positive or more.
So you would warm up you would warm up like an SMTP differently than you would Google, let's say, or Outlook?
Yeah. If you have a dedicated IP, you need at least 500 emails a day. So I have different warming providers. Again, some of them are hit or miss. A lot's changing in the warming space. I've noticed certain providers may actually correlate your email straight to spam. So you have to be careful and you have to test and see what's working. But yes, 100%. If I have a dedicated IP, one, I'm setting it up several weeks before, and two, I'm warming it up to at least 500 plus emails a day, mainly warming emails first. And then I'm monitoring Google Postmaster. So nothing comes out of the SMTP until the IP reputation is good, until the domain reputation is good. When that looks good, then the SMTP is integrated into Smartlead. And then when it's integrated into Smartlead again, lower volume, progressively scale up. But I think like SMTP is a lot easier to, like, I have a campaign right now, it's 5% plus reply rate. The SMTP is working better than G Suite. And a lot of the data is G Suite or Gmail, which is surprising. So sometimes your SMTP could outperform it. And the cool thing about SMTP is, one, you can use it across multiple domains. And two, it's much more affordable at scale.
And what are you using to warm up the SMTP?
I've had different warming providers. I mean, there's a lot of different tools out there. I'm not going to recommend anything specifically just because it's very volatile right now. You know, I don't want to put down anything, but I have seen there's certain providers out there that you start warming it up and then it could actually go straight to spam. So there's different providers out there. I'm not going to recommend anything, but I would say you should definitely test. I mean, if you try different warming providers, again, pay attention to your data in Google Postmaster. If you can establish a high IP reputation, if you have a good IP reputation, that means you're ready to send. And then you also need to pay attention because sometimes your IP reputation can dip. So if you start scaling up your SMTP too quick, it'll go from, you know, high to medium, or it'll dip down. You need to understand what's going on. Maybe you got a spike in spam rates. So I think like the key thing with SMTP is it could be very good. I mean, it's something that I use in a lot of my setups. Sometimes, I mean, if you can set up the SMTP across a bunch of different mailboxes, you know, Smartlead typically warms up to what, 40 emails a day. If you have a bunch across, that dedicated IP can hit that volume. I mean, you'd probably need like probably maybe 15 to 20 different mailboxes that you would use with the SMTP on Smartlead, and you can hit the 500 a day on the dedicated IP. But again, it's typically that the 500 a day is per domain. So you have to be creative with how you get there. Typically, like, yeah, I had a lot of mailboxes. A lot of mailboxes allowed me to hit that volume.
Awesome. Thank you, Julian. Next up is Chris. Can you unmute yourself, Chris?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yep, all clear.
Yeah.
Go for
So
it.
thank you for all the information, really precise and really fast. So a lot of value. So yeah, I have some question because I'm quite new in the sector. I've been doing it for 1 year. You test a lot of things, a lot of time, and so on. So you evolve over time. Sometimes it's super difficult because you don't know where is the problem, because as we know, it can be deliverability, it can be copy, it can be leads, and so on. And you started actually presenting by the importance of quality of leads. And I have a question in mind, because since there was quite a difficult moment with Microsoft kind of giving the delivery really low, I had really worse result with one of my clients. And I really tried to find out how could I update that. And I realized that at the same time, I started to scrap leads from Apollo to have bigger volumes, because scrapping only Sales Navigator, you're capped 2,000, 2,500 a day, I mean, per profile. So I had two questions. So for the quality of leads, so you explained intent-based, the leads your client provide you and so on. But when you're quite starting, you don't have access to the same kind of teams that kind of have all different tools or clutch things, tools like that are quite expensive. What would you recommend me to do except of scrapping like every day, maybe Sales Navigator to have up-to-date data, and maybe mix it with some Apollo data. So maybe another tool. And then I have a question on deliverability, but I've been doing quite a long time. So maybe just how you can help me have better data, because I feel that I don't have the same result I used to have with these clients than previously. So I don't know if it's in terms of data or what. So this is the first question. I don't know if I'm clear, but.
Yeah, no, it's clear. I would say data is not my core expertise. I've had the, ability to work with really cool clients who have good data. And to be clear too, if they didn't have the good data if I didn't think their data was good, in this case, I wouldn't work with them. I wouldn't even build the system. But if I would say, if you're starting off, I mean, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, like $80 a month. There's a lot of Chrome extensions, maybe 20. I mean, you're going to have to spend somewhere between like $100, $200 a month. And you may decide maybe $100 to $300 a month. It probably a good idea would be, I'd go to Smartlead, I'd go to hiring requests. There's a ton of really talented people on there. I mean, I think there's some really good people that you can work with. Either you're going to get a VA yourself, you're going to build it in-house, and you're going to train them on here's the ideal client profile. Here's their criteria. We're going to go into LinkedIn Sales Nav, and then you're going to build it's going to be pretty straightforward. You're just going to build different searches on LinkedIn Sales Nav. Then you're going to have a few Chrome extensions on there, and then you're going to scrape different batches of data, maybe get prospect. I mean, there's a lot of different Chrome extensions out there, but I would say that's probably the cheapest, way to do it. And I would also probably try to work with like a VA or someone who's an expert in data on the Smartlead channel. There's some good people on there. You need to test. I mean, I would actually test them first. I would say, hey, I'm trying to go after this. Can you get me a batch of 50 to 100 leads for free? Let me just test it and see how it works, and do that a few times. You'll actually get a little batch of data, and then you want to see how good are they to work with. But you need to get someone good. I mean, you need to either build it yourself, or you need to get someone who's good with data. They might even have their own proprietary sources. They might already have, existing data from different places. So I just test a lot of it. But I think Chrome extensions and LinkedIn Sales Nav is probably, the cheapest thing. And then also I'm always paying attention to how, when you need a trigger, you need a signal, right? It's not just looking at the data who's a good fit. If someone posted on LinkedIn and they're active on LinkedIn, that's good to know. If someone just switched a job or just someone left a job, any data that has some form of a signal is always going to convert much, much better from a response rate. If you're not going in with any signal or any intent behind it, it's going to be pretty tricky. It's more generic. So I would say, like, when I was back in the day, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was going after HR talent executives. I would always go after people who I'm having signals for people who left their role, and I'm waiting till they start a new role. As soon as they start a new role, I noticed that they're much more open to making a change. If they just started a role within the last few months, they're much more likely to commit to something, or at least take a meeting, or at least respond.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, but in terms of volume, it's way less. So you have to really okay. And the second question, in terms of deliverability, it's being much harder as it last month, and so I was considering it more and more. The SMTP, because you can have a dedicated IP or a shared IP. Do you recommend? Can you use actually shared IP? Usually they are cheaper, but it's more risky because you're kind of in a global pool. And then I have a question regarding the warm up when you have a dedicated IP or even a shared one. Do you warm up once you start launching the campaign in Smartlead, or because you already warm up with your own providers, you actually don't activate it with Smartlead? And last question regarding G Suite, because it has maybe the biggest deliverability, but it used to have. I started only with Microsoft Office because it was actually easier in terms of KYC and so on in order to manage all that. Do you still recommend going for G Suite? Maybe do you have providers that do it really, build the infrastructure and you're not blocked by all these KYC things, because it can be kind of difficult with a high volume of mails boxes.
Yeah, a few things there. So I think I'm never paying attention to volume. Like, yes, personally, I've scaled up and I've sent a ridiculous amount of email. I've sent like over almost 10,000 emails a day. I don't recommend that. I never recommend, like, if you could send, even scaling up to 500 emails a day is a lot. 1,500 emails a day is a lot, but I think less is more. The goal is always to send the least amount of emails to get the most amount of replies, because the more emails you send per mailbox, the quicker something's going to get burnt, the quicker something's going to get flagged. As far as SMTP, I never use shared. I've tested it, doesn't work. Again, it may or may not work, but I've tested a lot of different providers over many years, never had success with shared. I'd rather take on ownership of my reputation with the dedicated IP. Typically, when I'm building an outbound system, I map everything out on a Google Sheet. I know the breakdown, and then I'll try to set up my SMTP within the first week. I get my dedicated IP, I set it up, and then I do begin I don't put it into the campaign, and nothing is being sent until 4 weeks, typically 4 or 5 weeks. And I'm also paying attention to my Google Postmaster data. So if I don't have any data in Postmaster, I haven't sent enough volume from my IP, and I don't actually know the reputation. So I'm not sending anything until I have enough volume and at least 4 weeks. But I do the warming in Smartlead. I definitely use Smartlead. I definitely have a lot of domains and a lot of mailboxes across the SendGrid setup. And again, like, just the warming space is very volatile. Just in general, like, and I don't take any shortcuts with resellers. I don't take any shortcuts with my G Suite or my Office mailboxes. It's better to pay more for them. The resellers typically have lower quality IPs, worse deliverability. I just audited someone's account and they had the lowest reply rate I've ever seen. They were using 600 or 1,500 mailboxes, and they were all resellers. And the reply rate was the worst I've ever seen doing this for 7 years. So actually, if they would have just had 1% of their infrastructure was just using regular G Suite mailboxes, that would have gotten more responses than their entire setup. They were just using, G Suite mailboxes for somewhere between, $150 to $3. It never works. I mean, you can try it. It may or may not work, but it's not the long-term approach. Less is more when it comes to this. So yeah, and then I have tried other warming providers, but again, the space is so volatile that if I recommend something, it may or may not work, because a warming provider, it's like insurance, right? You're like, as a cold emailer, it's kind of like having a sports car, and you're going to get pulled over and you're going to get flagged. And the idea of warming is to offset, if you do get pulled over, it's to have insurance. It's to offset and keep you, on the road, prevent you from getting your license suspended. But, a lot's changed with Gmail, a lot's changed with Office, like their ability to flag warming. If you're not using how the warming is being used, like Smartlead has best in class warming. Other providers, they're catching up to them now. They can see that the subject lines are similar. They can see that the message looks kind of real, but it has an indicator. There's certain things that they're flagging now. So all I'm going to say is that there's a lot of warming providers out there, and I would just test everything and see what works for you. But you need to have something else that's testing where your emails are going. You need to just have some other source. And then as far as deliverability too, this is probably going to be valuable for everyone. If you're noticing that your reply rates are tanking and you think it's deliverability related, I'll give you kind of from a deliverability expert, what the process looks like, just super short and high level. Pay attention to your subject lines, pay attention to your copy, pay attention to your signatures, make sure none of those are getting flagged. If it's not that, pay attention to your from name, pay attention to your mailbox, pay attention to your domain. And if you go all the way down that chain and it's at the domain level, something is burnt. If you keep sending emails and your reply rate is tanking, your emails are going into spam and you're sending more emails going into spam, you're not going to get out. You have to be reactive, and you have to be, it's better to send less emails. I actually think like sticking between 5 to 15, 15 to 25 is more conservative, but you burn through your data slower and you protect your reputation. And again, the goal here is to get the highest amount of reply rate. So if you could just focus on how do I get my reply rate above 7 to 10%, if you can get 9%, 8% and above, you're in a really good spot. Then you can start talking about more domains, more mailboxes, more infrastructure. There's no shortcut when it comes to this. Like, just because you have an SMTP and a dedicated IP, if your copy's not good and your reply rate's low, actually all the dedicated IP is going to perform worse for you because you're taking ownership of that reputation. You have to know what you're doing. A dedicated IP may or may not work for you. You need enough volume and you need good enough copy and good enough data for it to work.
Okay, it's very clear. Thanks.
Awesome. And before we go to the last question, Jesse, we have a few quick ones on the chat if you'd want to look into. Last bottom, there's one as to if you have any. Yeah.
So why do we take a fixed IP when Google sends using its own IP? I mean, Google's sending, so yeah, every time you use G Suite, the IPs are always changing, and that may or may not work. Like, again, I've noticed that, I have some higher volume setups. I've noticed G Suite isn't performing as well for some clients. It's not getting the same reply rate it would. So you would use an SMTP because it gives you the key to success here is redundancy. The whole advantage of Smartlead is that you can have unlimited mailboxes for an affordable rate. So the key to success is having as much as you can and being able to test and see what works and what doesn't. I mean, that's what makes Smartlead so amazing, is you can have as many mailboxes as you want, as many different infrastructures as you want, and you need to have the ability to test what's working. And just because something is working today does not mean it'll work tomorrow. Like, I've seen a lot's going on. I mean, in the last 6 months, I've seen more changes in the last 6 months to a year than I've seen in the last 5 years. So they're cracking down on a lot of stuff. You need to pay attention to where you're getting your mailboxes from. What warming providers are you using? How many emails are you sending? And be very careful with links. Be very careful with tracking. Everything that you put in your email is an indicator. So if someone marks your message as spam, it's going to be fingerprinted. When someone marks your message as spam, they look at everything. They look at the from name. They look at the domain. They look at the IP it's coming from. They look at your infrastructure. They look at your copy, and they look at your signature. If you keep sending emails that get marked as spam, anything that's the same is going to get marked, is going to continue to go to spam. So you could actually, one bad sequence can bring down an entire domain. It can bring down all of your mailboxes because you have the same signature or the same link in everything. And that signature, that link in your signature, that's shared across all your mail.
And
I get my domains from Cloudflare, combination of Cloudflare, Namecheap, GoDaddy. I use GoDaddy with Office 365. I use Namecheap. I use Cloudflare. I've heard about Porkbun, but I haven't tested it. So I don't think the DNS, the domain hosting, is too important. I think really it's the infrastructure that you use. The main thing I'm going to say is just invest in this. It's not a cost, it's an investment. Spend more in your infrastructure, because if your infrastructure isn't solid, nothing else will work.
Right. And one last one from Richard is, do you have any insights on how the signature needs to look like?
Yeah, so maybe something I do different than most people is I don't put my signature on the signature mailbox level. I put it on the sequence level. So if I have an unsubscribe disclaimer, I'm rotating it with spintax on the sequence. If I send a follow-up email, I'm just going to use the person's first name. I'm not going to put the signature. I decide when and how the signature appears, and less is more. So if I have a follow-up email, my follow-up email will be a question. It'll be, have a wonderful day, Jesse, no signature on that email, because that follow-up email has more likelihood to be delivered because it has less in the signature. So I do all my signatures. It can be a little bit tricky, but you can use the different variables that Smartlead gives you. I do it at the sequence level. And that's worked pretty well for me. That's something that I switched over time.
Thank you for that. Nilesh, unmute yourself and go for
Thank you, Akash. Hello, Jesse. Jesse, you mentioned about the importance of high quality data, and once we validate that data, almost 20 to 30% of the data contributes to catch-all. So do you ignore that data, or do you validate and prefer to send an email to that data?
Yeah, so if I'm just setting up a system, so I'll take the data. If it's 100,000 leads, I'll look at the MX records. I look at the validity. I start with all my valids first. So I start with my valids first. And if I am going to take my catch-alls, again, my biggest thing is like, a catch-all may or may, it's not giving you an indicator of the validity of the email. So it may be good or it may be bad. So if you're going to take your catch-alls, you can send to them, but you should take them more seriously. I would batch in small buckets of your catch-alls. After you've gone through all your valids, at some point, once you have a higher reply rate, you can put small buckets into your different sequences of your catch-alls, but you need to be able to measure too. Actually, when you batch in your catch-alls, are they bouncing or are they delivering? And let's just say you have 10,000 catch-alls, you start putting them into your sequences, maybe batches of 250 to 500. If you notice that from the 500, if more than a percent, if a significant percentage of those, even if your delivery rate is, or if your bounce rate is 1% or higher, something is wrong there. So if you notice that you get an increase in spikes in your bounces, then I'd probably stop sending the rest of the catch-all data. So just small batches, and then pay attention to your bounces, because what is the bounce? Is it related to the data? Is the mailbox disabled, or is the email rejected? Very different depending on, what's causing it. Because if an email is getting rejected, it might have nothing to do with the data. It's the mailbox itself, it's your infrastructure, or if it's a mailbox disabled, it could be that email was never valid in the first place. So I think, Smartlead has a new feature that kind of helps protect you from this, or may not help, reduce your bounce rate. But luckily for all the campaigns I've done, it's pretty much 99% or higher delivery rate. If I notice anything is more than 1%, I'm pausing my campaigns, or I'm throttling everything down and figuring out what's causing the bounces and how do I prevent it.
And do you prefer to have a separate email infrastructure specifically targeting this catch-all, which
think
you
that's a
don't
good
want to mix
idea.
with any other campaign?
I would have a bunch of mailboxes, and maybe I'd have, it's always good to have, you have, let's say 10 domains, 100 mailboxes. I think maybe I would have them on G Suite, Office, and SendGrid, but maybe I would have some mailboxes that I wouldn't put into active. I would have a separate catch-all campaign, and I would probably tag these mailboxes as catch-all, and I'd probably test it, because you need to put it into a separate sequence so you can see what's the delivery rate and what's the bounce rate. And again, maybe batches of 500 to 1,000. It really depends on where the data is being sourced from, because sometimes the catch-all, universities may be fine, may not be a bad email. Other times, depending on where you source it from, could be bad. So yeah, I think separate sequence and separate mailboxes is a good idea.
Sure. Just this last question, Akash. So Jesse, you mentioned about tracking MX provider. So our target market here, we target B2B data sensitive industries like IT, fintech, insurtech. And what I read about certain MX providers on LinkedIn are that there are certain problematic MX providers like Proofpoint, Mimacast, Barracuda that allow this data sensitive industries to mark you as a spam, and that essentially bounce any emails you direct to any clients in that MX provider network. So how true is that? Should we avoid these problematic MX providers?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of Proofpoint or different firewalls. Typically, like anything that's not G Suite, I'm allocating to Office. I'm typically trying to use Microsoft servers, trying to get through Proofpoint or other firewalls. But I would say, like, to be honest, in that vertical, it's a lot harder. Like, I've been doing campaigns for 7 years. I've done some stuff to CTOs. I've done some stuff in the healthcare industry. To be honest, I would say cold email works well in certain verticals and it doesn't work well in others. I think, like, if I, as an agency, if someone was to tell me we have an amazing product, but we're going after, CTOs, we're going after healthcare companies, we're going after universities, I would say that typically, no matter how good your infrastructure is, they can have filters or firewalls on the top that says, if you're not part of their list, they're going to reject it. So actually, personally, I wouldn't take them on because I would say it's not the best channel. I would say SEO, investing in SEO and investing in opt-ins and building out really good automations, and maybe nurturing your CRM would perform exponentially better than trying to do cold. It's just a lot harder. And this was years ago. I mean, I've tried a lot. I actually worked for a cybersecurity company. Their response rates are pretty low. And again, I was trying my best, but it's really hard to get through certain types of companies. Again, I think Office, Microsoft should work better. But if you notice, you're just getting a ton of bounces. I think the marketing strategy should be different there.
Sure. Thank you, Jesse.
Awesome. Thank you, Nilesh and Jesse. That was the last question of the session. So thank you so much for this, Jesse. It's you are on a different level, and that's something that I learned after this session. So I think this was really insightful for all of you. The meeting is being recorded. It will be pushed on YouTube in 24 hours. And thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much to you as well, Jesse.
You guys.
Hope you have a great day. Cheers.